human warship emerged. Galactic Empire caught off guard. HFY sci-fi stories. The war had ended 1,000 years ago, and the galaxy had learned to forget. Empires paved over ruins with shining avenues and called the past a myth. Stars rose, stars died, and the archives were cleaned of anything that did not serve the present. The word human remained, but it was a fiction spoken around hearthlights, a species that burned hot and vanished, a cautionary tale about stubborn fire. Then a seam tore in the dark. It opened like a slow, glowing wound, its edges curling and hardening into geometry that did not match any known drive. The breach widened and a warship forced itself through, an iron mountain bristling with scars and dull amber ports, a cathedral of armor and engines. It looked like memory forged from steel. The Aegis of Earth arrived in a halo of frost and silence. On its bridge, light pulsed with the rhythm of a tired heart. Cables sagged like old sinew. Every console bore the patchwork of field repairs. Captain Elias Vance stood at the forward rail, gloved hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't young, he wasn't handsome, he wasn't the sort of hero you carve on coins. He was simply still standing. "Transit complete," said Commander Mara Ortega, her voice low and sure. "All systems functional." She added the last word like a prayer. Elias nodded. "Open the shutters." The armored shutters peeled back from the viewport. The stars flooded in shards of cold fire. A blue-white nebula breathed slow in the middle distance. The void was beautiful in the way of knives. "Where?" Elias asked. "Epsilon Reach," replied the navigator Sierra Imani. "Outer marches of the Galactic Empire. We came out close to the coordinates from the beacon we intercepted, 30 light-years from the signal source. Alarms trilled, a polite sound that didn't match the fear it carried. "Contact," Ortega said. "Multiples, they've seen us." On the tactical screen, sleek shapes knifed from hyperspace, curved hulls etched with living runes, engines whispering blue. Imperial cruisers took position like fencing masters, cutting angles, drawing a net. A voice slid into the bridge with the warmth of a well-oiled blade. "Unidentified vessel, you trespass upon Imperial territory. Power down drives and present for boarding. Noncompliance results in summary execution by fire." Elias looked at the old brass plaque above the helm. The letters were worn almost smooth. Aegis of Earth /UT07/ built to outlast. He breathed once the way a diver does before black water. "Transmit," he said. Ortega nodded. "Open." "This is United Terran Defense Vessel Aegis of Earth," Elias said. He spoke as if in a cathedral, the quiet kind that multiplies a whisper. "We request parley." A pause, a soft chuckle from the other side. "A mythship using a dead language. Charming. You'll surrender your hull and cores for inspection." Parley denied. Sierra Imani swallowed. "Sir, they're locking weapons." "Of course they are," Ortega muttered. Elias stared into the starfield. He remembered the first ship he had ever watched die. He remembered the last city dome on valleys, how it fogged white from the breath of 30,000 souls the moment before the glass failed. Survival had taught him patience, not softness. "Raise the bastion," he said. Energy crawled like dawn over the Aegis hull. Its shields did not flash or shimmer, they simply were the way mountains are. The first Imperial salvo struck and went thin, turning from spears to rain. The ship shuddered, then settled like a tired animal tightening its muscles. "Return fire," Elias said. "One shot. Minimum yield." The gunnery deck sang. An orange pulse left the ship with the laconic certainty of a hammer. It kissed the lead Imperial cruiser on its shoulder the way a friend lays a hand, then the cruiser fell apart like dust in sunlight. No flare, no scream. The vacuum kept all secrets. Silence came to the channel. A new voice replaced the first, brittle, clipped. "Identify your species." Elias answered with the only word he had. "Human." The reply never came. The Empire withdrew to the range where arrogance felt safe and watched the Aegis hang in space as if it belonged there. Inside, the crew reclaimed their breath. Chief Engineer Kenji Sato slid out from under a control panel with a ratchet in his teeth. "We just stared down an armada on a reactor older than their throne. I'd appreciate if we don't make a habit of it." "Noted," Elias said. Ortega's eyes were on a dim green light throbbing on the side panel. "The beacon," she said. "It's repeating. Same phrase, same encryption standard." Sierra traced the waveform with a fingertip. Pre-Imperial code, it says Sol endures. The word Sol was the sound an old wound makes when you touch it. "Plot a course," Elias said, and the Aegis turned its blunt nose toward history. They moved through fields of cold iron. Drift bones of battles long forgotten spun in the dark, Imperial hulls and stranger things older than empires. Some bore the sigil of an eagle clutching a broken world. Human ships. The crew grew quiet as they passed them. A fragment of gun barrel like a black finger. A corridor open to stars. A child's toy trapped under frozen condensation on a wall panel, seen for a heartbeat by the sweep of a searchlight. The signal grew stronger, and with it, a feeling like gravity. They found the vigilant dawn at the center of a graveyard. Half a mile of armored faith with its spine shattered and its nameplate pitted by centuries of dust. Its hull still bore scorch marks like fingerprints. When they latched to it, the old hull groaned as if it remembered pain. "Power readings?" Elias asked. "None," Sato said, "but the black box pings like it swore an oath." They walked the dead corridors in hard suits, their lights painting bones of steel and shadow. The Vigilant had been the last flagship of Earth, the shield that bought time for evac barges. The ship mothers still whispered to their children in the cold of long nights. They reached the command deck. Frost furred the consoles. Under a shattered viewport, a recording unit blinked with the patience of stone. Ortega touched it. The room filled with a voice, warm, iron-spined. "This is Commander Ashak Kellen of the Vigilant Dawn. If you are hearing this, we stood and the tide broke over us. If you are hearing this, we bought you minutes and you made them into years. If you are hearing this, humanity endures. Do not forget who you are." Silence welled after the echo. Sierra cleared her throat softly. "Sir, the rest of the logs, the battle over Sol, the evacuation paths, everything, it's all here." "Bring it home," Elias said. His voice wanted to break and didn't. That was when the Empire returned. 3 armadas, precise as a blade line, emerged around the graveyard. At the heart of the largest, a flagship shaped like an obsidian crescent unfurled its fin arrays. The channel opened. "I am High Admiral Tyrell," the voice announced. It held the dignity of one who believes the law is his reflection. "You have defied summons, destroyed Imperial property, and violated sanctified rec space. Present yourselves for judgment." Elias stood in front of the viewport and watched the wrecks of his ancestors drift between the living. It seemed fitting. "Judgment is honest when it comes after understanding," he said. "You haven't asked us a single question." Tyrell's reply was swift. "We ask nothing of shades." "Then learn," Elias said. The Aegis cut power to the tug latches and drifted free. Its engines lit with a dull orange and the old ship moved like a leviathan through kelp. The Imperial fleets closed. The first battle lasted 6 minutes. The Aegis did not rage or revel. It worked. Its guns spoke in short syllables. Its shields turned bright lances to mist. It did not slash. It removed quietly, precisely, the parts of the enemy that could kill. When the 6 minutes ended, one armada lay as confetti on night, the second bled drive plasma, and the third hung at wary distance like a student who has just learned what a teacher is. Admiral Tyrell's voice, when it returned, had lost its polish. "Parley." "Open," Elias said. "You fight with forbidden weapons," Tyrell said. "Erase beams, entanglement shears, those are sealed by the Concord." "Concord," Ortega repeated dry. The laws that bind the civilized galaxy, Tyrell snapped. Sierra leaned closer to the speaker. Did your Concord exist when the last cities of Earth burned? Did it intervene? Humanity extinguished itself, Tyrell said. We remember your species as a hand that clenched so hard it crushed its own bones. Elias let silence answer. Then you don't remember. You inherited a story that made you comfortable. Tyrell gathered himself. Leave our borders, do not return. Elias considered the dead weight of the Vigilant Dawn's logs in his databanks, every flame path home, every name whispered in the last minutes before light failed. We will leave, he said, but we will not be gone. They jumped. The breach closed like a stitch pulled tight. From that day, the galaxy lived with a new rumor. An old human warship appearing where the night was cruelest, cutting tyrants from their scaffolds, vanishing before propaganda could grow. Miners on Nova 8 whispered about amber light in the void when an Imperial tax fleet simply faded. Refugees told stories of a graying captain who spoke gently and broke sieges with a nod. The Aegis of Earth became an omen that taught oppressors to look over their shoulders. The Empire tightened its fist. Intelligence divisions dragged robed math priests from cloisters to decode human drives. War masters studied ancient battles and practiced humility they didn't understand. High Admiral Tyrell fashioned himself a spear, the Fulgurant, an experimental flagship with a spine of star iron and a heart of chained singularities. It would be the hunter of legends. The Aegis didn't notice. It had work. On the desert moon Kithra, they found the last living community of a species called the Leth. The Empire had evicted them to make way for a rare metal strip mine. The Leth were gentle people with translucent skin that turned sunrise into art. The Aegis arrived as detonators ticked under their homes. Elias said nothing. He simply dropped a tungsten rod the size of a silo into the planet's upper crust, not to kill, but to speak the only language tyrants hear. The rod hit a fault line. The fault line jumped, and the mining network tore itself in half. Detonators failed en masse. On the comms, the Leth murmured in disbelief like children who had seen a monster turn away. On Vesper Gate, they found a relay nexus where enslaved minds were wired into processors. Elias walked its halls with Ortega and Sato and Sierra at his side. He cut cables gently from skulls older than the Empire, and when the station's commandant arrived with soldiers and a contract, he read the first paragraph, tore the paper carefully in half, and said, "You aren't allowed to make laws like this anymore." He didn't kill the commandant. He took the bodies from their hooks and shooed the commandant out the airlock with nothing but a pressure suit and a transmitter. Tyrell's cruisers found that man 3 hours later, turning slow in sunlight, weeping into his helmet. On Tor Alaris, a rebel radio broadcast across the city in a trembling voice. "If there are stars that still care, we ask for mercy, not victory." An Imperial dreadnought drifted above the skyline like a held breath. The Aegis slid out of a seam in space and put a small hole through the dreadnought's magazine. The dreadnought sighed and went to pieces with the relief of a troubled sleeper. Tor Alaris named a school after a ship it never truly saw. The Empire called this terrorism. The free systems called it a weather change. The Aegis gathered friends the way a stone gathers moss, not seeking, simply moving long enough for the living to cling. One of them was Kesser Rill, a scholar from the archive moon of Palaems. She wore ink-stained sleeves and spoke 7 legal dialects. She boarded the Aegis with a single satchel and the stubbornness of a librarian who has watched soldiers kick shelves. "You need a witness," Kessa said to Elias in the mess, which smelled forever of metal and black coffee. "You won't speak to the galaxy, so I will. People deserve names and dates, not rumors." Elias raised his cup. "We don't wage a war of words." "You're not waging a war at all," Kessa said. "You're inserting a memory." He liked the way she said it, not as flattery, but as an angle on truth. She stayed. A message arrived then, crude but earnest. A three-tone chimed code in a human century turned into Imperial calendar. It came from a black dwarf system no one visited. The Aegis went. They expected a trap. They found a monastery. It hung between two small moons, cloaked in a swarm of prayer kites and debris. Its walls were patched ships welded into a ring that turned slowly, to make a suggestion of gravity. 1,000 lanterns flickered over the outer hull, little suns for a house that had none. At the lock, a monk waited, robe stitched from ex-military pressure fabric, a stripe of age-white hair falling over one eye. "Pilgrims," he said, bowing, "we wondered when you'd return." "Human," Sierra whispered. The monk smiled. "We were once. We are also more and less. Come." They called themselves the Quiet. Long ago they had been civilians aboard a convoy the vigilant dawn had shielded. Their barges strayed, engines failed, maps lied. They made a home in the dark and taught their children Saul songs as parables. They'd kept a language alive with needle and thread and stubborn faith, the way a body keeps warmth by huddling. In the chapel, the monk showed them a memory altar, an ancient terminal ringed with candles. When Sierra keyed it, Ashakelen's face bloomed. The commander looked tired and joyful in equal measure. "If you are here," Asha said, "then you survived the part where they tell you it's impossible. Good. Teach the galaxy, again, that the word impossible hates being eaten." Sierra touched the screen once like a cheek. Ortega wiped her eye with her sleeve and pretended to study the seam of a bulkhead. Kessa asked the monk, "Why did you call us?" He answered by kneeling at the altar and pressing his palm to a cracked brass plate. The wall slid aside to reveal racks of sealed canisters, seeds. "We kept Earth's trees," the monk said softly. "Hundreds of species, a gift to anyone who plants. We thought the day would come when someone remembered how." Elias released a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "We remember." They took the canisters aboard like treasure, and the Quiet sang a song in a language so old it sounded new. The Empire learned of the monastery less than a day later. The Fulgurant arrived with 2 carrier groups and a legal writ calling for seizure of contraband biologicals. Admiral Tyrell himself stood on the forward bridge, hand resting on a rail of carved star iron. He hailed the Aegis. "This ends. Yield and be dismantled with honor." Elias didn't answer at once. He looked at the seed canister under his palm. He looked at Kessa beside him with her satchel and stubborn eyes. He looked at Sato and Ortega and Sierra, who had followed him through breaches and famine and slow repairs in cold rooms. Finally he said, "We don't end." The Fulgurant moved like fury learned calculus. Its singularity heart dragged light itself across the deck plates. It was new, and that made it sharp. The Aegis was old, and that made it heavy. The second battle lasted much longer. Tyrell had studied. He punished the Aegis's tricks with counter-geometry. He stripped the ship of cover and burned its outrider drones one by one. The Aegis bled heat and microfragments. Its big gun kept its humor and its accuracy, but its recharge grew slow like breath climbing a hill. In the monastery, the Quiet prayed not for victory but for the courage to keep planting. Elias flew tired. His hands never shook, but his face told truth. He pivoted the ship through a triple slit and let the Fulgurant spear beam scrape the bastion. The bridge chimed in a tone he had learned to dread. "Forward bastion at 59%, Sato said, eyes flat. "Hull stress trending poor." "Poor," Ortega said, almost smiling. "Technical term." "Always has been," Sato said. Tyrell's voice came like cold water. "You are magnificent. It is a shame you insist on being anachronism." "Anachronisms are things we keep when we learn what matters," Kessa murmured. Elias closed his eyes. He heard Ashakelen's recording in his mind. "Do not forget who you are." When he opened them, something old inside him stood up and put on its code. "Mara," he said to Ortega, "do you still have the code from Valleys? The pulse shear pattern?" Her head snapped up. "That was a field hack, not a doctrine. We used it once and swore we wouldn't again. We swore not to use it to kill innocent ships in a crowded sky." Elias pointed through the viewport at the cold that held them all. "This is not that sky." She stared at him for 2 slow heartbeats. Then she nodded like an executioner honoring a judge. "Yes, Captain." The valley's pulse shear was not a weapon. It was a question forced into the guts of a drive. What is your real speed? What is your real heat? Most ships couldn't survive the honesty. It was a terrible thing to ask. The Aegis broadcast quietly, 2 packets buried in star noise, a third reversed on a frequency only new singularity cores used. The fulgurant took it in like breath. Nothing happened. Then everything did. The flagship's heart wanted to be faster than the hull that held it. Its gravity throat coughed on itself. The ship did not explode, it shuddered. The ring spine twisted, the spear beam flickered, coughed, and died. Tyrell's bridge went dark. Emergency lights stuttered. The Admiral stared through the gloom at his own hands as if they might offer translation. On the Aegis, Sato exhaled. Core destabilized, not critical, he can recover, but not quickly. "Then we leave," Elias said. "Leave." Ortega blinked. "We have him." "No," Elias said. He looked down at the seed canister. "We have them." They turned their back on a wounded flagship and slid between carriers to the monastery. The Quiet's lanterns were going out one by one as systems failed under the shockwaves of the battle. The Aegis backed against the station like a mother whale, letting the monks crawl across its hull on tethers, hands passing satchels, canisters, a child. Elias stood in the lock and took the child into his arms as if he were apprenticed to humanity itself. By the time Tyrell brought up a fresh weapons bank, the monastery lay empty. The Quiet had become passengers wrapped in blankets, their prayer kites folded into triangles that fit in their palms. The Aegis jumped. The breach closed. The fulgurant fired into vacuum and scorched the place where a memory had been. In his quarters, Elias watched the child sleep, little chest rising and falling, a shuttle-stitching dream to breathe. He set down Ashak Helen's logs on his desk and opened the first page. He wrote a single line beneath the last entry in neat script. "We came back. We are sorry we were late." Kesser Rill filed dispatches that spilled across the galaxy. She did not embellish. She told what had happened. The effect was stronger than any speech. Planets that had forgotten they were allowed to refuse began to say no with careful, courageous voices. The Empire did not collapse. Stories rarely make giants fall in a day. But the Empire learned that the cost of burning a village might include an orange light in the sky, and a mended fence where a grudge used to be. Tyrell hunted. Pride became purpose. He stopped speaking like a governor and started speaking like a soldier who understood he might not be right. He cornered the Aegis at the Edgewell Rift and set traps made from calculus and patience. He failed, and in failing, learned. He set a second trap in the dust rings of Morna. He succeeded and salved his defeat with that small victory. He forced the Aegis to run, bastion low, engines hot. He watched its wake and loved it the way a hunter loves an animal he will never tame. On a lonely station called Icefall, he asked an old dockhand, "Why do they fight like that?" The dockhand leaned on her broom and squinted at the stars. "Like what?" "Like they are already dead and they just haven't told their bodies." She spit thoughtfully. "Maybe they remember something we don't." Years turned like wheels. The Aegis kept moving. It planted seeds on reclaimed moons and in the hearts of the unsure. It printed simple books with simple titles. How to sew a dome, how to tie a sling, how to say no without dying. Kessa traveled with little classrooms that fit in cargo holds. Sierra taught navigators how to read a sky without a network. Sato fixed things for the pleasure of seeing them work. Ortega learned to smile again without it hurting. Elias went gray, then white. New lines carved his face, canyoned by years of starwind and decisions no one else was allowed to make. He carried every name they couldn't save. He kept their pronouncement simple. "We're here." It turned out hope didn't need more syllables. And then, after all the small victories and the failures that tasted like copper, the message came. A voice speaking the Empire's oldest formal dialect, cracking on certain words the way a voice does when it is unused to apology. Admiral Tyrell to the Aegis of Earth. I request parley in good faith. Ortega looked up from the console. It's a trap. Of course it is, Sato said wearily. Sierra smiled despite herself. Maybe it's also not. Elias nodded. Send him a location where a trap is hard. They chose a garden, not a metaphor, a literal garden. On Lao's world, a temperate moon where the Aegis had once distributed seed and water rigs, a field of young trees had learned to keep their leaves in a wind some said was untrustworthy. The meeting table was a salvaged cargo plate. The chairs were borrowed from a school. Tyrell arrived unarmed except for the kind of pride a man cannot remove without becoming someone else. He looked across the table and saw tired faces. He had expected, what? A demigod, a monster. He saw a captain with a plain coat and a librarian and a mechanic with grease on his knuckles and a navigator who wore her hair like a question mark. He saw humans. Do you plan to rebuild your empire? Tyrell asked. No preamble. He had come too far for ceremony. Elias shook his head. We don't know how to build empires. We tried once. It ended the way all towers end, heavy at the top. And yet you fight ours. We move around yours, Kessa said gently. We relieve pressure. We show edges. We let people see corners. Tyrell looked away to the trees. He touched a leaf with a general's careful fingers. Our historians wrote that your species burned when it should have bent. Both are true, Elias said. Burned when we should have bent. We bent when we should have stood. We learned. That's all we can claim. The admiral studied him for a long time. My emperor will not accept your existence. He cannot. It implies the law is not absolute. Laws are beams, Sato said. You test them. If they hold, you trust them. If they fail, you shore them. If they crack, you redesign. Tyrell nearly smiled. You talk like builders. We are, Sierra said softly. Every navigator learns it. A course is something you build through error. They shared bread and tea disliked by all present and appreciated because it was shared. They spoke without reach. They left without promise. The parley ended the way most real things end. Nothing happened at once and then everything did. Tyrell returned to the fulgurant and told his staff, we will fight them again, but not to win. To contain the damage until the center learns humility. In the months that followed, Imperial decrees changed tone. They lost the words absolute and forever. They gained the words appeal and review. Governors watched, confused, as their sentences came back with notes in the margins. Kesser Rill's dispatches were being read in rooms where they were not supposed to be read. The Aegis kept moving, and wherever it left a book or a seed or a night sky suddenly clear, because a dreadnought had been persuaded to leave, someone picked up what was left and took a step. Not all was light. On Bel Afiuchus the Aegis arrived late. A village burned, a scream still shaking the air. Elias walked among the ashes and did not give speeches. He gathered bones. He held a mother who had nothing left to hold. He spoke with Tyrell on a private channel that static could not decode, and when the admiral said, I failed, Elias said, so did we. They were both correct. They were both wrong in the way men are wrong when they confuse scope with responsibility. They sat with it. Then they stood up. On a black ocean under a red sky, Ortega and Sierra learned to laugh again, sitting on a pier made of salvage while children told them jokes that made no sense in space. Sato taught a boy how to fix a water pump with a nail and a prayer. Kesser wrote a paragraph about the way hope sounds when it is learning to speak through a broken tooth. Elias climbed a hill with bad knees and watched the sun go down behind the first grove grown from earth trees in 2,000 years. He was alone except for the birds. He thought of a Helen. He thought of those who had knelt in halls and said goodbyes that took hours because time was a thing made of people then. He thought of the first day he took the captain's chair, when his hands would not sit still on the arms because he was young and certain that ships obeyed men. He thought of the day he learned he obeyed the ship. He did not hear footsteps until Kessa stood beside him. She held out a cup of something that tasted like fruit and iron. He took it. "You're allowed to be tired," she said. "I am," he said, "and I'm not." They watched the children of the quiet run between the trees, their prayer kites reimagined as play. "Will it hold?" Kessa asked. "The change?" "No," Elias said, and surprised her with a smile. "Nothing holds. That's why we build." He died years later, not in battle, not in a speech, but in his sleep with a Shah Kellen's recording still sometimes playing on a loop when he forgot to turn it off. The Aegis did not stop. Ortega took the chair she had refused 3 times and sat in it like a woman who knows the weight of sitting. Sierra took the helm and flew like someone who had learned that humility has edges. Sato kept making things work. Kessa kept writing things down. The Empire did not dissolve. It changed shape. It learned to share its own shadow with itself. It learned to count costs with different math. Tyrell retired and planted a tree on Lao's world that he visited every year, sitting with his hands folded and his head unhelmed, listening in case the leaves would tell him something useful. People left bread at the base of the trunk. No one knew why, only that it felt right. In the end, no anthem marked the moment the galaxy was different. It happened the way spring does. You look up one day and realize the snow didn't ask permission to leave. A smuggler in the Enclave baked bread in a kitchen that used to be a weapons locker and taught her son to read from a pamphlet titled How to Say No Without Dying. A miner on Nova 8 stood in a union hall and said, "We're not asking, we're telling," and no one arrested him. A governor wrote a sentence that did not include the word forever and slept better. A girl from the quiet walked barefoot on soil warmed by 2 suns and wondered what Earth grass had felt like. The Aegis of Earth appeared in the night sky above a free port where slavers had once owned the ground, its amber light steady, its engines a hum in the bone, and a boy looked up and said to his brother, "That's the ship that makes bullies tell the truth." They were wrong, of course. The ship didn't make anything. It simply made room. The last dispatch Kessa Rill filed before she set down her pen for the first long rest of her life said nothing the galaxy didn't already know. It said, "We were not saved. We were reminded. The difference is everything." Somewhere far from all the great halls and their echoes, on a world where no one asked permission to plant, the seeds from the monastery sprouted under a cheesecloth tent. A child reached out to touch a leaf. The leaf felt like a future. The Aegis moved on. And that day the galaxy learned humanity doesn't conquer, it endures. Headphone, thank you for listening. Until next time, stay human, stay unbroken.